Celtic FC. The 60s were very different to the world we live in today. The Beatles were still in their prime, most TVs were still black and white, but perhaps the most surprising thing of all, Celtic were one of the best clubs in the world. In the 1966-67 season, they became the first ever team to win the treble in Europe, winning the Scottish League, Scottish Cup, and of course the European Cup, which is known today as the Champions League. And the crazy thing is that they did this without any international help, because every single player on that team was Scottish, all born within 30 miles from Celtic Park, which is kind of crazy if you really think about it. They scored 196 goals that season, and to this day they are the only Scottish team to ever win the European Cup. AFC Ajax. Now our next treble winner takes us to the Dutch capital of Amsterdam. It's the 1971-72 season, and this was around the time the idea of total football was starting to take shape. It was the club's first season without one of their best players, Rinus Michels, since 1965. But that didn't matter because they had a front three of Swart, Kaiser, and of course the icon himself, Johan Cruyff. He scored 25 goals this season while also helping the team to win the Eredivisie, the KNVB Cup, and the European Cup. And in the final of that European Cup against Inter Milan, he was the one who stepped up. He scored 2 second half goals in the final, making Ajax only the second club in history to win the European treble. PSV Eindhoven. For the third team to ever win the treble, we stay in the Netherlands because in the 1987-88 season, PSV Eindhoven won the same 3 exact trophies Ajax won: the Eredivisie, the KNVB Cup, and of course the European Cup. They dominated the Dutch league that season, finishing 9 points ahead of Ajax. However, winning the European Cup wasn't as easy because in the final against Benfica, both teams struggled to break each other down, and after 90 minutes and extra time, they went to penalties, which of course PSV would go on to win, securing a treble. Manchester United. Now we're actually getting into the good stuff because, let's be honest bro, most of the teams we mentioned up to this point weren't, let's just say, well known. But now we're getting into the big dogs, and we head to the red side of Manchester to one of the most historic clubs of all time, Manchester United. First of all because it's Manchester United of course, but second of all because they became the first ever English team to win a treble. They had a stacked squad, the likes of Neville, Beckham, Keane, and Scholes, and of course they had arguably the greatest manager of all time in Sir Alex Ferguson. In 1999, Man United won the Premier League, the FA Cup, and finally we get to call it this, the Champions League. United clinched the Premier League by the hair, winning it with 1 point over Arsenal. Next up though, the FA Cup, they clinched it thanks to goals from Sheringham and Scholes in the final. These 2 trophies were cool and all, but where shit really went down was in the Champions League final against Bayern Munich, because this game genuinely has a case to be the best Champions League game of all time. See, the thing is, Man United were missing 2 of their best players in the most important part of the pitch, Roy Keane and Paul Scholes, who were both out due to suspension. The match was held at the iconic Nou Camp, and from the first whistle, Bayern were on demon timing. Just 6 minutes into the game, Bayern got a free kick just outside the box, and Basler steps up and dispatches it beautifully. And they held that lead for most of the game until injury time came, or in this case, Fergie time. The 90th minute hit, and United had a corner, and boom, Sheringham scores 1-1. But the football scriptwriters weren't done yet, because literally moments later, United get another corner, and a man who goes by the name of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, of course, bags the winning goal, clinching not only the Champions League for United, but also the goddamn treble. FC Barcelona. In the 08-09 season, Barcelona, under the fresh leadership of the one and only Pep Guardiola, took European football by storm. Pep wasn't playing around because even though it was his first season as a senior team coach, he sent legends like Ronaldinho and Deco packing, putting his trust on a young, small Argentinian kid that goes by the name of Lionel Messi. And with a midfield starring Xavi, Iniesta, and Busquets, this team had one memo:
take the ball, pass the ball, take the ball, pass the ball, take the ball, pass the ball.
And they did just that, because while Ajax started total football back in the 70s, Pep and Barcelona revolutionized it. They didn't just beat teams, they dug them a grave and buried them. They got their hands on La Liga with 87 points, edging it with 9 points ahead of Madrid, who they demolished 6-2 at the Bernabeu. In the Copa del Rey, they cruised to victories, thrashing Atletico Bilbao 4-1 in the final. 2 down, but the biggest surprise was yet to come, the Champions League. The semi-final against Chelsea was wild to say the least. They were seconds away from elimination when Iniesta scored that goal, a long-range wonder strike that sent Barcelona to the final on away goals. You could argue that Chelsea got robbed this game, but what can you do? The game's the game. And then in the final, Barca versus Manchester United in Rome. United were the defending champs and had Ronaldo at his peak, but Barcelona played them off the park. Samuel Eto'o opened the scoring, and Messi with that iconic header sealed the 2-0 win. But wait, there's more, because Barcelona also snagged the Spanish Super Cup, UEFA Super Cup, in the Club World Cup, 6 trophies in 1 year, the legendary sextuple. They were the first and only European team to ever do at that point. Inter Milan. Now the next European treble winning team came just a year later in the 09-10 season. Under the command of the one and only Jose Mourinho, Inter pulled off one of the most iconic seasons in football history. They had a crazy stacked squad as well. The backline was a wall led by legends like Xavier Zanetti, Lucio, Walter Samuel, Maicon, and of course Marco Materazzi. And also had some heavy hitters up front with the likes of Wesley Sneijder, Diego Milito, and Samuel Eto'o. Inter cruised to the title, finishing with 82 points as they fended off a strong challenge from Roma. The Champions League run though was nothing short of outrageous. The semi-finals, they came up against the treble winners from the year before, FC Barcelona. Inter won 3-1 at the San Siro in the first leg, then went full park the bus mode at Camp Nou. They lost 1-0 but advanced 3-2 on aggregate. That image of Mourinho running across the pitch celebrating is still iconic to this day, and it really shows how much of a villain Jose really was. In the final against Bayern Munich, it was the Diego Milito show. The Argentine scored twice, delivering a 2-0 victory and clinching the treble. It was the first time an Italian club ever won the Serie A, Coppa Italia, and the Champions League in a single season. And side note, the fact that Milito didn't even get nominated for the Ballon d'Or that year is actually blasphemous. And I really want to make a video on it soon, so stay on the lookout for that. Bayern Munich. For our next club, we take a trip to Germany because in the 2012-13 season, Bayern won the European treble. After the heartbreak of losing the Champions League final at home to Chelsea in 2012, Bayern came back with a vengeance. Jupp Heynckes, their manager, turned the squad into a ruthless, well-oiled machine. They had everything: pace, power, and of course the duo of Robben and Ribéry. In the Bundesliga, Bayern didn't just win the league, they broke it. They clinched the title in record time with only 28 matches played, finished with 91 points and had a goal difference of plus 80. They ended up 25 points ahead of second place Borussia Dortmund, and in the DFB Pokal, they completed part 2 of their domestic double by defeating Stuttgart 3-2 in the final. But the real story was in the Champions League. Bayern's European campaign was nothing short of legendary. And I'm not gonna lie bro, they absolutely demolished Barcelona in the semi-finals with a jaw-dropping 7-0 aggregate win. Then came the final at Wembley. It was an all-German showdown against Borussia Dortmund. It was tense, it was electric, and when Robben scored the winner in the 89th minute, it was absolute cinema. Bayern won 2-1, sealing their 5th Champions League title and completing the treble. FC Barcelona the second time. It was a 2014-15 season, and Barcelona, just like all the teams I mentioned before, had an absolutely stacked team. They had probably the greatest front three of all time in Leo Messi, Luis Suarez, and Neymar, aka MSN. These guys weren't just good, they were a nightmare for defenders. They scored a ridiculous 122 goals across all competitions, which is absolutely bonkers by the way. In La Liga, Barcelona went toe-to-toe with Real Madrid. They secured the title with 94 points, finishing 2 points ahead of their rivals. In the Copa del Rey, they cruised to a victory, defeating Atletico Bilbao 3-1 in the final. And Messi's goal in that match? Well, this is gonna sound like glazed, but I generally can't think of a word to describe it. He dribbled past half of Bilbao's team and slotted it in bottom bins. But the real cherry on top was the Champions League. Barcelona went on an absolutely crazy run, beating some of Europe's best. They faced Manchester City, PSG, and Bayern Munich on their way to the final. The semi-final against Bayern is where Messi dropped Jerome Boateng and tipped Manuel Neuer, becoming an instant meme. In the final, they met Juventus in Berlin. It was a tense match, but Barca came out on top 3-1, with goals from Rakitic, Suarez, and Neymar, getting their second treble in just 6 years. Bayern Munich, also the second time. This season didn't start all sunshine and rainbows. Bayern were struggling under Niko Jovic, but once Hansi Flick took over, everything changed. He revitalized the squad, and suddenly every player was in their bag. Robert Lewandowski scored damn near every game, Thomas Muller was racking up assists, and Alphonso Davies was an absolute unit on the left. In the Bundesliga, Bayern didn't just win, they obliterated the competition. They finished 13 points clear of second place Borussia Dortmund, notching up 100 goals in the process. Lewandowski alone scored 34 goals, making him the league's top scorer. In the Champions League though, things were quite different. As we all know, the pandemic struck in 2020, which meant that all the games from the quarterfinals onwards were going to be one leg each. While people tried arguing that this made it easier for them, well, I argue that they won every single game. The peak of this dominance was the 8-2 demolition of Barcelona in the quarterfinals. After that, in the semifinals, they brushed past Lyon, and in the final, they faced PSG. It was supposed to be a super game, but in the end, there was only one goal, and that was Kingsley Coman's header that was enough for a 1-0 win for Bayern Munich, clinching their 6th Champions League trophy. They also went on to win the UEFA Super Cup and the FIFA Club World Cup, completing a historic sextuple, only the second ever team to do so since Pep Guardiola's Barcelona. Manchester City. In the 22-23 season, Man City became only the second English club to ever win the treble. They added Haaland to an already stacked squad, and that's all it took because he broke every single record imaginable. In the Premier League, City had to grind it out. Arsenal led the league for a majority of the season, but City, as they do, found another gear. They went on a 22-game unbeaten run, eventually overtaking Arsenal and securing their third consecutive Premier League title. In the FA Cup, City showcased their dominance, including a 2-1 win against local rivals Manchester United in the final. But the real prize was the Champions League. City had been chasing it for years, and this season nothing was stopping them. Their run included a 4-0 demolition of Real Madrid in the semi-finals, and in the final they faced Inter Milan in Istanbul. It wasn't as flashy, but Rodri's cool finish secured a 1-0 win, delivering City their first ever Champions League title. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap on every treble winning team explained. And with that being said, thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe, because best believe we are here to take over.